everyone, it's Sky from Arthritis to Athlete here, and if you were raised anything like me, then you were probably told from day one that humans are total omnivores, no questions asked. And by definition, you probably could call most of us behavioral omnivores because we engage in eating meat. But the fact remains that while we may act like behavioral omnivores, we have very few physiological or psychological adaptations to consuming animal products.
What? But we got canines! We obviously are omnivores!
Really, man? You're gonna keep making me do that like every video? Gosh. So before you follow your gut reaction and just click away from this video, stick around for just a second. Maybe you'll learn something. Now hear me out on this. I'm not the type of vegan that's gonna exaggerate and just spew nonsense everywhere and say things like, no human in history ever ate meat ever. Instead, I'm gonna talk about this topic pretty objectively. So without further ado, let's introduce the 3 biggest omnivorous myths. Roll the intro. Okay, so before we start, we actually need to talk about what makes an herbivore, omnivore, or carnivore. These are just roughly defined categories at the end of the day. Where an animal gets the majority of its calories is usually what we define it as. For example, chimps are primarily herbivores, even though they might eat some bugs or a monkey or two every here and there when they're starving. Also, cats, which are undeniably carnivores, will often be found consuming things like grasses. Basically, what I'm saying is these terms aren't super rigid. They're basically just terms to describe what an organism will subsist best on. So just because we can digest meat doesn't automatically make us true omnivores. If that were true, then we'd have to consider cows and horses omnivores too, and that's obviously not true. Alright, and with that out of the way, it's time for myth number 1, and that is that, man, we got canines! We're obviously omnivores, right?
Yo, bro, it's cool you're vegan and all, but, I could never do that. It's like so unnatural because I got these canines. I'm kind of like a lion,
Sorry to break it to you, but you're definitely not like a lion. You okay? You good?
How about now?
Now this is probably the most common response I get from people whenever I say that we're primarily herbivores. Now, as much as I would like this argument to be true, it really doesn't hold much weight. In fact, it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. For example, animals like horses and gorillas have canines as well, but they're obviously herbivores, so we're gonna have to dig a little deeper than this. Also, our bite force is laughably weak compared to other true omnivores. If you don't believe me, just try biting through the raw hide of an animal. That's not going to work so well for you now. And even having large canine teeth as well as a strong bite doesn't even mean an animal is an omnivore. For example, the previously mentioned gorilla, as well as the hippo, which has the largest canine teeth in the entire animal kingdom, and they are only herbivores. But even though our teeth look nothing like true omnivores' teeth, I still continue to get comments like, no way, man, I'm an omnivore, I got canines right here, I'm basically a grizzly bear, rawr, rawr, rawr. It's so stupid. Alright, now we have myth number 2, and that is that meat eating made our brains grow, and thus turned us into the humans that we are today. Obviously, we must be omnivores, right? This idea seems to be accepted as fact. But if you ask any competent anthropologist, they usually lean towards things like cooked starches and tubers being the things that gave us more calories that made our brains what they are now. We could go way into detail on this type of idea, but if you want to know more about this kind of thing, check out Mike the Vegan's video on why humans are starchivores. I'll link that in the description. The fact is that plants decay rapidly over time, but bones don't. And this has led to an obvious bias in the archaeological record towards animal sources of food in our prehistoric days. But now that we're coming back and revisiting some of these older archaeological finds, we know that microscopic bits of plants do fossilize. And now it's actually very clear that most true Paleolithic humans were eating massive amounts of whole plant foods, up to 100 grams of fiber a day. And if you're eating up to 100 grams of fiber a day, that's a lot of plants. There's not much room for anything else. And if you don't believe me, take it from Dr. Richard Wrangham, who is the chair of biological anthropology at Harvard University.
Meat is important to an extent, but not as important as the popular media might lead you to believe. It's unpredictable, it's hard to get, so humans tend to rely first and foremost on plant foods that they can find in the environment. Anatomically, I would say we're not adapted to meat at all. You could say that we've evolved a face and a mouth that's for eating something else that's not meat, and most people believe that's plant foods.
And logically, it would make sense that our brain would thrive on plant sources of food. And this is because our brains use about 20% of our total body's energy, and the preferred source is glucose, which comes from, you guessed it, plants. Being able to access the more calorie-dense, starchy tubers by cooking them was a huge step up from our brains. So it's more likely that cooking, rather than meat, actually helped our brains grow.
Fruits are not particularly reliable either. They're seasonal. The starches, the sugars that are kept in underground storage organs of plants are much more ubiquitous in the environment and much more reliable and are there pretty much year-round.
Now I can already hear some people saying,
No way, man, our brains are made of fat, so we must have had to have animal fat to power our brains. Checkmate, vegans!
okay, I can appreciate the sentiment, but let's take a step back at this and look at it logically for a second. I'm not saying that we never ate meat as a species. That would be absolutely ridiculous. But this idea that we got a large percentage of our calories from animal sources is even more ridiculous. This actually leads me into our third and last myth about endurance hunting. This is the idea that we just ran our prey to exhaustion for many, many, many hours before eventually killing it. Now again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying things like this never happened, but let's be real guys, there is no way in heck that that is our first choice to get food. The absolutely tremendous amount of energy you'd have to expend by finding, chasing, and then killing this animal over the course of a day or two makes this a horrible, horrible evolutionary strategy for survival. It would have simply been so much easier to forage and find plant foods that is everywhere, it's the most reliable source of calories, than to just chase and hunt down an animal.
Hey Grog, me hungry. We go kill antelope. No, last time I kill antelope, it stabbed me with horn. We need food, Grog. But Grog, I have potato right here.
The biological metrics of this situation just don't add up at all. Again, I'm not saying this never happened, I'm just saying it was probably a last resort and only happened during starvation. But hey, I can already hear the people saying in the comments, no, once you find an animal, you can subsist on that for weeks. Well, here's the thing. Once you actually kill the animal, it would be virtually impossible for you to take advantage of all the calories of it like most omnivores or true carnivores could. That's because true omnivores and carnivores have huge stomachs. Once they would get a kill, they can gorge themselves with tens and tens of thousands of calories all at once. If we tried to do that, we would just explode. And by the time we would wait for our food to digest, we'd have to start worrying about things like disease and rotting on the carcass. Isn't it just so nice to talk about things like carcasses and rotting and disease? And this brings me to my last small point here. Most humans do not have the psychology of omnivores or carnivores. Most people, when they're presented with the idea of killing an animal with their bare hands to survive, it kind of makes them, cower away a little bit. And rightly so. But a bear, who is a true omnivore mind you, has no problem biting into the throat and ripping out the guts of any animal it sees fit, and then eating it. If we ever had to do that to an animal, most of us would be emotionally scarred for a long time, if not for life. We as humans seek things like compassion and empathy, not killing everything we see just so we can eat it. But culture has made this an acceptable thing to do because we no longer have to kill our food. We don't even have to think about that our food was killed. It's just served to us on a silver platter, and then we just don't ever have to think about that it was actually a living animal. Wonderful, right? Wrapping up this little point, think about it like this. If you put a baby in a crib with an apple and a bunny, it's going to pet the bunny and eat the apple. Whereas if you did that with a true omnivore or carnivore, it's obviously going to probably eat both of them, but it's definitely not going to pet the bunny. And on top of all of these arguments is the undeniable fact that only herbivores get heart disease. And guess what? That's our #1 killer of men and women. Trying to make the argument that we're true omnivores and that's our primary state of being whenever heart disease kills more people than any other thing on the planet is ludicrous. True omnivores do not, and I repeat, do not get heart disease. Period. Honestly, that simple fact might be the best evidence we have that humans are primarily herbivorous. In closing, I'm not saying that primitive humans never ate meat. Absolutely not. I'm just making the case that the vast majority of evidence points to us being best adapted to eat mostly plants, and that's what we ate most of throughout human history. And I'll leave you with this. if we can be totally happy, healthy, and thriving on a whole food plant-based diet that's better for you, me, the planet, and all life on it, why wouldn't we? Alright everyone, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you got any value out of this video, please consider adding value back to my channel by liking, commenting, and hitting that subscribe button as well as the bell icon next to it. It really helps my channel out a lot. Alright, and with that, I'll see you guys soon, and God bless.